Okay, the second presentation is a four-step formula for change. And after lunch, I can't remember more than 4 steps, so that's a good thing. We have with us Sean Sweeney from Roots and Shoots, and that organization has a storied history. It was founded by Dr. Jane Goodall. It's a global movement that empowers youth to follow a 4-step formula for leading change in their communities. 4 steps. Let's hear it for Sean Sweeney, one of us.
Thank you, everyone. Kevin, I appreciated your mention of feeling awkward. Being back on stage after the last couple of years is definitely very nerve-wracking, so thanks for calling that out. As they mentioned, I'm Sean Sweeney. I'm here as Associate Vice President of Communications and Partnerships at the Jane Goodall Institute. That is my not most favorite title. My most favorite title is actually an alum of the Roots and Shoots program that I've been really glad to be a part of for almost 20 years. I did the math this morning, and I'm like, I can now say almost 20 years, which is totally insane to me. So I'm gonna start with a story. In 2019, during a planning conference in Tanzania, I had the opportunity to meet Robert. We were in his village of Vikonge, and Robert is a young entrepreneur who's been supported by a village savings and loan program, basically one that supports small businesses, and this is something that the Jane Goodall Institute does in a lot of villages around Gombe National Park, which is the area where Dr. Goodall is famous for her research. While we were with Robert, we had a lot of time to ask questions and listen to his experience and kind of understand what the origin of his business was and that sort of thing. Robert had a really interesting story or a really interesting business in that many people in his community grew cereal grains organically. They were also a part of this program, but nobody had a place to mill the grains. So Robert used his loan from the bank to buy a mill so that he could then basically sell access to the mill. He ended up raising so much money from his business that he could make a little movie theater in their village so they could watch soccer tournaments. But all around, we were meeting business leaders like Robert, and what I was so fascinated about was how eco-friendly and how sustainable these businesses were. And when we were talking to Robert, I asked him, how did you know how to set up a business like this? And Robert said it was because of Roots and Shoots. Robert, and many of the other young entrepreneurs in his community had gone to a school that had prioritized a program like Roots and Shoots, where they had beehives, where they foraged for mushrooms in their school forest, where they planted trees. All of those kinds of experiences led him to this future career as a sustainable business owner. And I was so impressed and so inspired by Robert's story. Here we are in 2022. Our human family has more young people than ever before. At the same time, we're facing so many existential crises: climate change, biodiversity loss, systemic racism, and so many more. And when we think about young people, we have to think about their experience as we go through these crises. They're not only facing a future with these threats, they're facing these threats now. And I wonder, are we considering young people's perspectives when it comes to addressing these crises? Are we engaging them and empowering them in solutions? Are we removing barriers and changing systems so that they can engage? 30 years ago, our founder, Dr. Jane Goodall, who we mentioned, saw a future coming where we would have a generation of young people who would grow up feeling nothing but apathy. And at that point in her career, as she was working to listen to a lot of different people from the communities that we work with across the chimpanzee range in many African nations to young people that she encountered around the world on her lecture tours and book tours. All she kept hearing was how they felt like their future had been stolen from them. She knew that any work that we would do for chimpanzees, for other wildlife, for the environment would really be meaningless if we let that generation of young people grow up feeling that apathy. She knew that every young person she encountered needed to know that they had a role to play and that they knew they could make a difference. So with 12 young Tanzanian students in 1991, just over 30 years ago, on her back porch in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, Roots and Shoots was born. They started with her listening to her problem, to the problems that they saw in their communities, ones that they cared about, and paid attention to the interconnectedness of the problems. One's for people, one for other animals, and one for the shared environment, nature. After listening to their perspectives and kind of hearing what they really cared about, Jane worked with those 12 young people to come up with projects that addressed those issues that they were so passionate about. One group of kids were really passionate about how animals were being treated in a local market, so they came up with a project to help chickens and improve their welfare. Another group of kids saw a lot of trees being cut down in their local forests, so they started a tree planting project. And another group of kids were concerned about other young people facing homelessness in their communities, so they came up with a project to help those kids. All driven by those young people, all based on those issues that they cared about, and all leaving them with a sense of empowerment that they could make a difference. Now, 3 decades later, Roots and Shoots is empowering young people in more than 60 countries. And we're seeing the same kind of empowerment and fight against apathy that I mentioned in that early group. Being flexible and adaptable for young people of all ages, we, with Roots and Shoots, prioritize 2 messages. One, that every single day, every single one of us makes an impact on the planet, on other people, on other animals, and on the environment, and that even small actions that we take can make a big difference, especially when we add them up all around the world. And 2, the other main message is that all life is interconnected. And we pay attention to how those actions and those decisions that we make affect other people, other animals, and the environment. And as we're thinking about solutions, we emphasize that interconnectedness and make sure that when we are doing any kind of engagement or project or action, that we're thinking about people, animals, and the environment. Roots and Shoots was designed to be flexible and take that same approach that Jane took by listening to young people in their own context, in their own communities, and helping figure out how they could work together to create solutions to those local problems and those local issues that they were facing. While our engagement with young people around the world really varies from country to country and community to community. In the United States, based on hearing from young people here, knowing what their needs are, hearing from educators and adult mentors, we offer this flexible 4-step formula that we mention, intentionally simple and hopefully helpful, and definitely welcome everyone to steal it. I love that. So with just walking through this model briefly, first, if we're talking about starting with young people who feel especially apathetic, we know from our founder that the best way to inspire hope, to inspire action, is helping them feel hopeful and helping them through telling stories. And through Jane's change-making story, if you're not familiar, Jane emphasizes often how she had very ordinary beginnings and hopefully everyone in this room is aware of what Jane has accomplished as not only a trailblazing scientist discovering many things about chimpanzees that were unknown, but also being an activist. Jane has had really two careers, one as a scientist and one as an activist, and she started from really humble beginnings. So emphasizing her story and emphasizing stories with representation from many different identities, we help young people get started and get them engaged and feel inspired and kind of give them that antidote to apathy. Then we switch to step 2, which is observation. We come from a scientific organization, and we care about helping young people explore their communities, learn about the nature that's around them, but also the built environment, and really help them explore and get to know the problems that they care about in their communities that are affecting people, animals, and the environment. We do that through a technique that we call community mapping. It's not unique to us, something that many organizations do. We use it in this 4-step formula as a way to help young people start to put their ideas together, start thinking about the problems that they want to address, and work together to prioritize where they want to get started. Once they've got their map, that takes them to taking action, where they do the practical work of setting up some goals and picking the one problem they want to start with, setting some goals, and taking action. They may have to do some fundraising, they may plan some events, but all towards helping to minimize whatever that problem is. And the last step is one that, as we've developed this model, I feel is probably the most important. It's celebrate, but it's celebrate and reflect. So this is the moment where after young people have taken action and had the opportunity to see the impact of their work, they can think about what went really well, but also about what they learned and what they might do better in the future. That takes them back to their community map. They can mark their impact, and they can look at how they can continue working on that problem, how they can switch to a new problem, how they can connect solutions with each other, and that community map lets them continue their work in a living, breathing way. Going back to Robert in Vikonge Village in Tanzania, doing my own reflection over my last almost 20 years with Roots and Shoots, I have to say his response is starting to become a norm, which is really inspiring to me. I now know more people than I can count who've said, of course I knew how to do it because I had this experience with Roots and Shoots. When I say they knew how to do it, I mean the 9 characteristics that you see up here on the screen. This, in comparison, or in alignment with our 4-step formula, is a set of characteristics that we've identified from research and work and listening to young people that have gone through the program, that these are the outputs of this experience of going through this 4-step formula, listening to what they're caring about, implementing projects that help them drive change, and then celebrating and reflecting. This is what we produce when we use a model like this to help young people create change. Going into their futures with any one of these, with a sense of civic engagement, a sense of empowerment, is all we hope for young people today and in our future, whether it's from Roots and Shoots or from any one of the organizations that you work for. Our Roots and Shoots family is always growing. Let's see if this will. Our Roots and Shoots family is always growing, and we're delighted to be here today with Children in Nature Network and to be partnering with so many of you here. We hope to join you. We hope you'll join us. I hope you'll steal from today, and would just say that we have so many resources and materials available to learn more about this 4-step formula. We have a free online course where you can learn more. We actually offer mini grants to support young people in helping them advance their projects. So please check out more on rootsandshoots.org. And thank you so much for having us here today.
Okay, so Sean, I'm learning 4 steps, right? I can remember 4 steps. Folks, anyone that has a question, if you have one of those cards, raise it and we'll come around and get it. Well, I have a question, and as you said, or I guess the last speaker said, sometimes you just mess up and you go back to, you figure it out. Now you're going to all these different countries and you're the new kid on the block, and I suspect cultural differences and who are these people and what do they want to do. You want to give us some tips on how you've overcome that or what model you've used?
That's a really good question, and it's one that Dr. Jane talks to us about a lot, in having it be as simple and as straightforward as possible for any young person to start their own group and start working on their own projects on their own. And we are often asked about a school curriculum and alignment with standards and, all of those kinds of things. And the truth is that, we want this to be as simple and as adaptive for any young person anywhere on the planet. And, the 4-step formula gives a bit of a framework to help get started. At least that's, how we find it's helpful here in the US. But really, ultimately, it's going back to that message of every individual has a role to play and every individual makes a difference. And, if Jane were standing here right now, she would just encourage someone who wants to get started to think about everyday actions that they make that might be a little bit lighter on the planet. And when we think about all of us doing that and how that all adds up, that adds up to big impact. And then inevitably, when we start thinking about that, we find other people who are thinking the same way and want to work together to, start projects. And in my experience, it happens very organically. And actually, during the pandemic, some of my favorite Roots and Shoots projects were families who found themselves now at home in ways that they never would have been before. And one family would be starting a recycling at home, while they were at home. And then another family would find that they were also doing recycling. And then they would find out that their city recycling program wasn't exactly the greatest. And by making some of those local connections, they were actually able to improve their local recycling program or get composting started. Or there's one group that I love that has this project called Monarch Mile in Burbank, where families got together and started planting a mile of milkweed to help create nesting sites for monarch butterflies in their area. So just really amazing to see how those connections come together. And it seems strange to have a model that's so simple and has, hopefully the lowest barrier for entry, but that's by design.
Yes. So it sounded like you're saying, what is the common thread amidst all this diversity? What sort of made it work? Is that a good summary? What seems to show up in every instance?
So it's a really interesting question, and 2 thoughts come to mind. One is this sense of hope. Jane has this theory of change that we need, in order to fight all these threats that we're facing on the planet, that we need to have hope, because hope spurs action. And so often what I encounter in young people is that switch from being apathetic or coming from a place of nascent hope and they just haven't had an experience that helps really, make that hope grow. And it's like a self-perpetuating cycle where once they experience that, it just keeps going and going and going, like someone like Robert, who takes it into their career. And it's really interesting because we have teachers who were a part of Roots and Shoots in the early days, in the 30 years ago. They're now retiring, so we're going to retirement parties for colleagues who have been doing Roots and Shoots, and to hear them talk about that hope that they inspired in their students over 30 years is really amazing. To see young people who are going into careers, in environmentalism and, politics, where they're becoming ministers of environment, all of those kinds of things are a manifestation of that hope and that commitment that they get from an experience like this. So that would be one of the biggest themes. And I also think that the other one is thinking about that interconnectedness. And some of my favorite projects are ones that, nature never would have been considered a part of someone working on people facing homelessness. Or one of my favorite projects was a project that was addressing accidents involving people getting hit by cars. And it turned out that it was also an issue for dogs and cats that were getting hit by cars. And the group just implemented a new way of signing a bunch of different intersections to prevent car crashes with people, and it also helped animals at the same time. So that's another thing that in our world we're so, intersectionalism and thinking in an interconnected way is definitely something that I see from this work as well.
Sean, I just can't thank you enough for your time today. And I figured out that, like some of you, I'd like to start a Roots and Shoots program, so I will talk to you afterwards.
I love that. We are happy to be here, and we've got our table out in the exhibit hall, so happy to talk to anyone. And I will just do a plug that Dr. Goodall will be with us on Thursday, so I hope you will all tune in for, she will be with us virtually, I should say. We have to be clear about these things in 2022. So I'm really looking forward to welcoming her and meeting many of you. Thank you.